You have landed on The Substance. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, saying we are glad to have you here. Here at The Substance, we're looking to have conversations that help us all better appreciate goodness, truth, and beauty. Previous guests include folks like Film Spotting's Josh Larson, Elliot Cohen, Megan Abbott, actor-director John Carroll Lynch, Dan McCoy from the Flophouse podcast, and our pals over at Letterboxd, Slim and Mitchell. We've got a great library of over 160 episodes, and if you're new to the show, there's a lot of great stuff there to go back and check out. And this week we are back with another Substantive Cinema. Was really looking forward to this one for a while. We talked about it on the show, and I teased it last week. So Taste of Cherry is one of two movies. I think I've maybe, for long-time listeners, I think even back when Trevor and Vince were on the show, I think we maybe mentioned it one time, but Taste of Cherry and one other movie, we actually did everything for. We watched the movies, we got our notes together, and then we just, for various reasons, decided not to do it. So very happy to come back to this one. It's a movie that since I watched it that first time to get ready for the show, I've liked it even more. And this week, very excited to have on my friend Marta Djordjevic joining me. Marta is a writer, a film historian, a podcaster, very much a cinephile of various means on her various feeds. I've enjoyed listening to her previous podcast. Her new Substack is started up, and there's more podcasting to be done in the future, and it's all very enjoyable. She's got a lot of insights, and her various feeds, I think, are always helping me build my watch list. So I've enjoyed for a long time engaging with her content. So this was a wonderful opportunity to have her on and talk with her about a great movie. And I do want to mention briefly, if you're coming to this episode with no real knowledge of the movie, both this episode and the film itself deal with themes of suicide. It's a pretty important part of the movie, and we talk about that quite a bit in the episode. So just wanted to give everybody a heads up off the top on that. Reminder that if you haven't yet, if you're not driving, open up that podcast app, hit the 5-star button, and if you happen to be listening on Apple, consider writing us a sentence or two about what you appreciate about the show. It's very helpful. It helps more people find the show, and I need to start reading some of those again. I know I did that a little while ago, but if you end up writing something, we'll read it here on the show. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Marta Djordjevic on Abbas Kiarostami's Taste of Cherry. Well, Marta, welcome to The Substance. It's so nice to finally get this on the books.
It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. This has been, a long time coming, but we did
Well,
it and for a great
exactly.
movie.
It is. This was such a wonderful revisit. And you messaged me earlier today, like, we picked a really good one. Like, I'm very curious to hear from the
Mm.
audience what they think about this. Like, I am trying a lot more now in the current iteration of The Substance to have a nice mixture of old and new, foreign and like American stuff. But this is one that I can't wait to hear what listeners who seek this one out and watch it think of it. Do you remember the first time you saw this one?
Oh gosh. Vaguely. It was either a year ago or 2 years ago. This was now my third rewatch. But I watched Taste of Cherry after completing the Coker trilogy. That's what I did first.
So the
And
Coker trilogy was your introduction to Kiarostami?
it was actually a really funny story. I watched the Coker trilogy. The first one, obviously, is what I started with. Where is the Friend's House? It's on the
Can't
Criterion
wait
channel.
to see that.
Oh, you're gonna love it. Actually, I'm curious to know what you think because with my experience, I thought it was a relaxing movie. I thought it was so fulfilling for me emotionally. It had a lot of heart, like many of his movies do. And so I text my best friend and I tell her, you gotta watch this film. It's so relaxing. You're gonna have a great time. She watches it the next night, texts me back after saying, what is wrong with you? There's nothing relaxing about this. She's like, I was stressed. It was like uncut gems in Iran with a little boy.
Interesting.
So I'd be curious to know what you think because I think that's a huge gap in I guess enjoyment
Experience.
levels. Yeah,
Well,
experience.
my prediction, I'm usually like, I love being surprised, and occasionally, like when I can for new movies, I
Mm.
kind of like going in blind when I'm able. But I predict I will like Where's the Friend's House very much. And while I do understand the tension and I know the story, and I've seen clips and this week been looking at a lot of people talking about various Kiarostami stuff, like I imagine I will be more on the, like, it seems like very gentle,
Mhm.
enjoyable cinema. Like, yes, the kid is stressed out, but it seems like a very pure and tender film.
Exactly. And the reason why I mention it is, I mean, with the Coker trilogy, it's good to watch them in order because they get progressively more meta with each one.
They do. I can't wait to see the last one.
Oh, it is so good, but go in order.
Of
And
course, of
then
course.
after that, I watched Taste of Cherry. And then when I was researching it for my own podcast months later, I discovered that that was, or the Coker trilogy was a designation given by critics. So that was not
Yeah,
Kiarostami's
unofficial. It's kind
idea.
of like the Cornetto trilogy or stuff like that, where they're
Exactly.
like, let's let's find thematic thing trilogy. Like we think in threes. Like we are
Exactly.
creatures of patterns and habits, and we like
Totally.
threes.
And he mentioned someone asked him once, like, "Oh, what do you?" They brought up the Coker trilogy, and he said, "This wasn't my idea, but if I was ever to designate movies together, I would have added Taste of Cherry as well." So it's interesting to look at it that way, and probably for you to revisit it again after you do the Coker trilogy, because those themes of human resilience are really strong in all four films.
Yeah, we here at the Substance, like we love looking at things through the lens of goodness, truth, and beauty. And I think that Kiarostami, as a filmmaker and even bigger than that, just as an artist, like that is so much of what he, like those are the tools he uses. Those are the themes he's interested in. I went and re-listened to the show that you did on Kiarostami, the Coker
Hmm.
trilogy, and a little bit of Taste of Cherry. And your guest on the show, I'm forgetting his name right now, forgive me.
Matthew Germanis, yes.
And he, like multiple times, I don't know what his tradition or religious backgrounds are or anything, but many times like he was even bringing up like this is like very like divine vision stuff. And it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
like the beauty of humanity, and like the the divine and the supernatural and the incredible in just the mundane. And I love genre so much.
Mhm.
I'm enjoying blockbusters less now, but I love a good one, a well-made one. But there's something that's just so like fulfilling when you engage with art that is just about the the regular everyday stuff. Because like, yeah, like love and loss and family and the fears and desires and like thinking about like what is our life, what is the value of my life, like everything is in that. It doesn't have to be artificially high stakes or world ending stuff. Like a guy driving around in a car talking to people in the Taste of Cherry is riveting and deals with the biggest things in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I made a silly little Twitter post last night and on Threads as well, where I said something like, "Oh, if I'm feeling stressed or down, I should just watch a Kiarostami film. It's just guaranteed to put me in a good mood and just kind of slow down and have some solace that things will be okay, you know? It's beautiful, and it makes sense as well that Kiarostami's background as well, was in poetry too, because you watch his films, and Taste of Cherry is a great example, of course, and it really does feel like visual poetry. It just kind of envelops you, and he's one of my favorite filmmakers for that reason.
I it feels kind of funny having only seen a handful of his shorts in this movie, but like I feel like in two, three
4 years from now, and in the future, like he will be one of my favorites. Like aspirationally, just looking at his body of work, like I know for the most part what's ahead of me in engaging with his work, and I love this man, and I didn't realize how because he's an Iranian filmmaker who primarily worked in Iran. He did some more international stuff, but he was primarily working in Iran. If you look at his work through a Western lens, you're like, oh, this feels different. But then, like, he only died a few years ago.
Mhm.
This is not a guy who made movies decades and decades and decades ago. And
Yeah.
yeah, this was yeah. I can't wait for my Kiarostami journey.
Yeah. And I mean, he didn't even start early on in his career because he did he was a painter for a while for commercials or no book covers and posters, and then he later did TV commercials. But he only started working as a feature film director, I think, in his 30s or something.
I
Um,
love those stories.
same,
Very aspirational and encouraging.
same for me too as well. And so it's interesting to follow his career and just see how he grew, yet he always maintained those same themes that were found even early on in his poetry too, um, that he then translated into filmmaking. I mean, even his art as well, that also got translated into filmmaking too. Like these were all these little building blocks that he took to ultimately quite the beautiful career.
No, it's true. And I don't want to get too off on all these side tangents. One of the things I do like about your show is all the background you bring. And feel free to, because I know you went deep on this several months ago, but seeing how he started as when you say, like a commercial filmmaker, like making commercials, and then various like here in the I think Canada, you guys have a little bit potentially. I say better. That could maybe be like a greener grass kind of thing, but you guys over there have like state funded arts, and that's how he got in. Like they're like, hey, you're one of our resident artists. You make this stuff. So like he
Mhm.
just kind of had to make it, and then kind of put in his 10,000 hours doing that
Yeah.
and made really interesting like educational documentaries or like stuff for various civics departments. He's like, "Hey, here's my movie about efficiency and like traffic or whatever." And you're like, there's something beautiful and very human about this. Like
Yeah.
seeing his development. I hope Criterion comes out actually. Criterion, if you're listening, one, sponsor the show, but two, put out, I'd love like a Kiarostami commercials and documentaries set.
Mhm.
Like throw a 80 or $100 price tag on there, get people to write good essays, get some good packaging. Cause he made like dozens of like 20 to 60-minute documentaries,
Yeah.
and they're just so interesting.
Yeah, and there always seems to be a lesson at the end of them. Like that's what I love about Kiarostami, and he later does that in his features too. There's always this lesson to learn. I would say there's probably only one feature of his that I watched where I'm like, what was the lesson here? But besides that, I always
Is that the
leave.
frames one where it's just like pictures?
No, that's like someone in love that I was mentioning
Okay.
off air.
I can't wait to get to that one. That's one that I'm actually trying not to read anything about. I just want to be surprised by that one.
Okay, I won't say more then. Then we can talk about Taste of Cherry.
No, no, no. I'm sorry. Tell me your thoughts on it. Sorry.
No, no, no. On which? On Taste of Cherry or?
No, whatever you're gonna say about
Oh,
the.
no, I really don't wanna spoil your experience because I do think it's also a movie that, like you said, is best experienced going in blind. It takes a turn that woof. But all I was saying was that's the only film in his filmography that I can think of that I walked away from kinda questioning, what his message was because he's so known to have these messages to take away and these lessons for you to apply in your life later on. And I didn't really see that one in that one, but besides that, it's a great film.
Maybe we circle back next year. Take a look at
Yes.
that one if there's something there.
Yes.
Um, so with Taste of Cherry, I remember. So this longtime listeners, I wonder if anybody remembers this because I don't even know if we said this on the show or like an Instagram live or on social media. Taste of Cherry in the history of the show is one of two movies, by far the better one, but one of two movies where in years past we had actually watched this movie. I'd watched this movie with my previous co-hosts with the intent of doing an episode on it. but we just never did. My previous co-hosts were not, I'll say, amused. They did not get it. They were not into it. And they're like, yeah, Philip, we're not going to talk about this movie for an hour with you. We got to pick a different one. I appreciate you trying to stretch us, but not this one, guy.
Was the argument he's in a car the entire time talking?
No, they were not like Philistines. Trevor and Vincent, very cultured guys. They just were not, they just did not click with it.
Mm.
Like, neither one of them, I am not being derogatory. They're just not like cinephiles.
Mm.
I push them far with some stuff, but like they've both watched movies with subtitles before, but I just don't think that they were like, I had read about it. I was familiar with Kiarostami. I hadn't seen any of his features before, but like I knew what to expect. They did not. I kind of surprised him with it, and they're like, what was that? Especially with the ending, which I want to save that for later, but
Mhm.
they were like, Philip, what have you made me watch? So I was like, okay, we can do something a little easier. So excited to finally circle back and
Yay.
have a Taste of Cherry episode.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the sort of movie that what you get out of it also depends on how much you want to sit and think about it. I was thinking about this last night as well, and I'm like, why do I love this movie so much, and why do I connect with movies like this so much? And I really think, if you allow yourself to feel and sit and kind of just understand about these emotions that these characters are going through, it can really elevate the experience for you. But not everybody wants to do that, right? So
They do not. As I messaged you when I found out, our boy Roger really missed the boat on this one
it
back
happens.
in '97.
Oh
Every now and
God.
then, like, there are a few very famous Roger Ebert, like, given 4 stars to a piece of crap or given 1 star
Hmm.
to a masterpiece. And this is a new one on my list.
This
1
was,
star.
yeah, this was, I mean,
He was
this was like
rough.
something Pauline Kael would write, I would
I
say.
know, exactly. You're not wrong. Like, this is a Palme d'Or winner, and he's basically like, this is an emperor with no clothes situation. This is a bunch of nonsense. And I was like, dang, woof.
Yeah, that one
I don't know if
surprised
he
me.
was too drunk or too tired or what, but yeah, he was brutal.
But, then he made Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. So,
You're not wrong about that.
yep.
So before we get into the very beginning of the movie, I do want to call out another reason that I suggested this to my previous co-hosts. When the Blu-ray for the Criterion was re-released, I knew it was an upgrade, but I didn't realize this is number 45 in the Criterion collection. This is an early
Yeah.
title.
I have the old one right here, the original.
Wow. I had seen that at my library several times, but I never looked at it. That's not a bad image, but that is not one of the Criterion covers that just grabbed me. So
Mm-mm.
I never looked at it. I couldn't tell you who directed it, couldn't tell you what it was about, but the beautiful and haunting image on the new edition, I was like, let me take a look at that.
It's
And
stunning.
that's why I ended up picking up. A lot of great Criterion covers have caused me to pick up their films and introduce
Same.
me to some really wonderful experiences.
Mishima is one that always stands out for me, the Criterion cover for that one.
Nice. Uh, I'll say one of mine as well here because it has come back a lot. We have not covered this on the show. We've talked about it in passing, but the biggest one in my mind is Paris, Texas. Like that image of just like the haunted, kind of desolate
Mm-hmm.
land with that big sign. I was like, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the best blind watches I've ever had.
It's amazing. It's an amazing film. If you ever need a guest for that, you know where to find
I'm
me.
so sad that I missed the re-release of Paris, Texas in
Same.
theaters.
Same.
Anyway, Taste of Cherry. How about did you watch it on the channel or the disc?
I hate to admit that I watched it on the channel. I do that often, even though I have this huge library here. I'm just lazy sometimes. Um, it was a channel watch.
No, that's quite all right. I imagine it's probably the same edition. I had forgotten how it opened. It's a very strong opening.
Hmm.
Like right after the initial company logos, it's like winner of the 1997 Palme d'Or, which, listeners, if you're not familiar, that's the Cannes Film Festival's equivalent of the Best Picture. And that's the Best Picture of a small panel of international filmmaker folks, like, who decide what the best film is. So right away, it's like, this was the best film at Cannes in 1997. Cuts to black for a second, and then the dedication is "In the Name of God," and I was like, okay, like, the movie is really, like, putting it out there at the beginning. I was like, okay, like, I wasn't watching it this time just for fun. I was watching it for the show, so I was
Mm.
already locked in. But I was like, okay, movie, I get it. Like, this is serious, important stuff.
Yeah,
Did
absolutely.
did it have that on the channel?
It did, it did. And it really got me thinking actually that this came out after Close Up. I always thought it was before. Close Up was in 1990, and I would say those two are his most
Wow.
famous
I would have
films.
said Close Up came after Taste of Cherry as well.
Yeah.
I think it's the Iran of it all, sadly, to us
Yeah.
Westerners.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's old.
Yeah, exactly. But no, this came out after, and I would say probably this is his most successful film, tied with Close Up maybe.
Yeah, Close Up is the one from my readings and listening to people. That's the, like, the big one that I've heard. But
Mm,
I think since the Criterion re-release, I have seen more people champion Taste of Cherry.
mm. I mean, it's a great film.
So Taste of Cherry is a very simple, it's like a deceptively simple movie. The framing of the movie is, you have this man, Mr. Body, driving around Tehran in his little car, and he's talking to people. And it takes a little while to reveal itself, but pretty sure it's on just about any synopsis you'd read on Letterboxd or Criterion. He is a man who has decided, for unspoken, unsaid, unrevealed reasons, that he's too lonely, he's too despairing of life, and he wants to end things. So he is looking for somebody. While he has decided to take his own life, he doesn't want to be, I don't know, uncivil about it, so he wants to have a proper burial. So the the bulk of the movie is him trying to recruit somebody to help bury him after he has taken his own life. And there are three main vignettes with three main people who he is trying to coerce and close the sale of being his burial partner. Um, but through these conversations, through him driving around, there's, like we said, there is everything in life and, like, cosmologically in this film.
Mhm. That was such a beautiful synopsis, by
Well,
the way.
thank you.
I love that. Um, and I also like the fact that we never discover what the cause of his grief is and why he wants to do this. I like that it's open ended. We don't even see the inside of his home at one point. We just see, I think, through the
Yeah,
curtains, through the
it's
outside.
outside.
He's just in the car all the time, and it really reminds me. I always think about it as his coffin. Like he is traveling
Hmm.
in his coffin towards his final resting place in that movie. Now, does he stay in that final resting place? I guess we'll talk about that later. I have
Yeah,
my own
that's a
thoughts.
really, I want to save that a little bit, but that's
Mhm.
so fascinating. And I love that, just like the best art, uh, and from what I understand, Kiarostami does this in much of his work. He enlists the audience to participate
Mhm.
in his films. His films are very evocative and very provocative and suggesting, but he really does bring in the viewer like a true artist, like a painter, like a poet. He engages the viewer and, like, you're in this with me, and you kind of bring the meaning. Like, I'm gonna deal with, like, very important substantive things, but you need to participate with me to kind of
Mhm.
see what we come up with.
Yeah. He kind of reminds me, this is going to be a crazy comparison, so bear with me. But he kind of reminds me of David Lynch in that way, where he,
Okay.
there you go. That was the reaction I was waiting for, where he just refuses to tell you his thoughts behind, why a character does what he does. He just says, figure it out, basically. And Kiarostami is a bit more, I guess, forgiving and willing to help than Lynch is, who just flat out will not tell you anything. But for example, there was an interview where Kiarostami kind of hinted, he said that there are signs, if you look for them throughout the film, that Mr. Body isn't out to take his own life. So I watched it through that lens this time around, my third time, and there is a lot there for that argument.
Absolutely. I wasn't sure if I was thinking gonna maybe wait to that towards the end, but I absolutely um this is a film that it's not one initially you're like, oh, I want to watch that over and over. But I think that this is a film that will do real well with multiple rewatches. And yeah, I wasn't necessarily looking for that, but I saw that quite a bit more on this viewing.
Well, what's interesting now is I watched it, and honestly, so many aspects of it I've forgotten. And like I said, I've seen it twice before, but everything that I seem to remember each time are just those meaningful conversations in the
Hmm.
car. And everything else that surrounds that just seemingly leaves my mind after months pass and then it comes back. So, yeah, I think you're very right. It's a film that's definitely worth the rewatch, multiple rewatches.
I don't know why. Maybe because I've seen your content and I know how much you appreciate his work. I thought you were maybe going to say Lynch, but I was like, I wonder how. I wonder what the through line is. But I've watched a few interviews with him in this week prepping for this, and he is more willing than Lynch to give clues and
Mhm.
to give like to give you an on ramp, rather not clues,
Mhm.
but to give you an on ramp to his work. But man, oh man, I watched one interview, and I mean, sorry to the interviewer, no shit. Like, he's probably not the easiest person to interview, but this interviewer was like not prepared and asking like not very wonderful questions, and he was just kind of like giving answers that were kind of like he engaged with what he was saying, but he was also very sarcastic. He made the audience laugh a lot. Like, this was a public Q&A and was very kind of basically like, these are stupid questions, man.
Oof. I I sometimes think it's so good to be fueled by anxiety to not embarrass yourself because I don't know about you. For me, for example, I will over prepare for any sort of interview or any sort of film discussion just because I could not stand the notion of imagine having a filmmaker make fun of you in a
Oof.
public forum.
No, I often do that for the show, especially when I have a little leeway to prep for it. It's
Mm,
like, yeah, I obviously watch the movie. If there's a commentary, I watch that. If there's documentaries, watch that. Try to read interviews, da da da. Yeah, because it's like whatever I have, like that interview is on YouTube and will be forever. Like our podcasts, once we hit publish, like they're out there. People,
mm,
my grandkids one day might be able to listen to those, and I don't want to sound like an idiot. I mean, I'm sure I could always prepare more, but yeah, you don't want to, especially if you get to talk to like
mhm.
somebody of that stature.
Yep,
Yeah, you want to bring your A game.
absolutely. Yeah. Do your research. Figure out what the movie's about beforehand.
So there's a few different ways we can look at this. We can talk thematically. We can look at
Mm,
maybe the three little vignettes. One thing at the beginning that stuck out to me this time because I looked at some more of his shorts. I really want to watch the Coker films,
mm,
but was just looking at his work and seeing how much and you talked about this a little in your episode, seeing how much children and in particular like the perspective of a child features in his work.
mhm.
And it's a small little moment, but there's these two very cute little kids playing in like this wrecked out little car, like right at the beginning, after he leaves the laborers, like, but and
Oh,
before he
yeah.
gets to the soldier.
Mhm, mhm,
There's just these two little cute kids, and he talks to him for just a second. But they're playing, and looking at that as one of the initial and actually we can maybe even talk about the laborers part. I
mm.
don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but those two kids playing in like this wrecked car that's just kind of there and abandoned, they are having so much fun and
Yes.
so much joy. Like, they're in like a desert type environment in this like almost like war zone looking type deal.
Mhm.
This car is wrecked, it's missing windows and doors, but they are having the time of their life. They are in the midst of what could be seen as like an unhappy situation, finding so much joy, and Mr. Body engaging with them, not being gruff, but just like, what are you guys doing? And seeing how one can have joy maybe in what could be seen as less than ideal circumstances right off the bat. That really stood
Mhm.
out to me.
There's so many moments like that where it just slows down. And there's just so much to appreciate. There's that other moment where he just looks up and he's watching those birds that are scattered across the sky, or when he sits down and watches the sunset. There's so much of that. But you're right. The one with the kids, see, I already forgot about that until you mentioned it. That's what I mean. It just slips my mind because of these conversations that Mr. Body has. But that is such a beautiful moment. And again, it just speaks to his early career as well. I mean, he started doing educational films for kids,
Hmm.
right?
Really
So
interesting work there too.
yeah, yeah. So that was the Canon or Canon.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, the pronunciation, I don't know, it escapes me, but it was the Institute for Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults. And so those were all educational films where he was seeking to, most of them were set in classrooms or just involved kids, but
Yep.
they were supposed to teach people a lesson. And again, something that he continues later on. And it's nice to see how he keeps including kids in his films as well. Like it all just kind of comes together. There's just such a Kiarostami-ness to all of his work, from the start to the later work.
Very true. Yeah, and the movie can be seen so many ways, but I was kind of looking at, actually maybe I wasn't watching it with this, but as I was thinking back over it and considering it, I think it is a very fair reading of the movie to look at nearly everything in the movie that he encounters and the conversations that he has as like arguments for joy and for
Hmm.
living uh, a fulfilled, content life. Not that you're like overjoyed all the time, but contentment, because clearly
Hmm.
Mr. Body is he's depressed, he is despairing, he is, we don't know if a thing happened or
Hmm.
if the cumulative loneliness and loss, or we have no idea. He appears to be alone. We don't know how he got alone. He doesn't really talk about his personal life very much, but when he does, it's really interesting actually,
Hmm.
in the first vignette. But yeah, we don't know a lot about this man, but he's at a breaking point, and a
Hmm.
lot of both the conversations, like you said, the birds and the children, these things can be seen as arguments for joy.
Absolutely. No, I definitely agree. I mean, in terms of his life, there was a teeny tiny moment with the last man, the museum worker, which I'm
Oh,
sure we'll talk about more later. But it's a just a passing statement where the museum worker tells him, he doesn't ask him, he tells him, I don't know what's going on in your life, but I'm assuming it's either family troubles or what's the other thing? He says work
money.
troubles, I think. More
Yeah,
money, yeah. And Mr. Body just doesn't say anything, which really leads me to believe it's likely family troubles because I don't think it's money. He has, he's willing to.
he seems to be very content, like the beginning. And I am not a historian, but the broad strokes that I know, like Iran had a really hard time after some of their wars and their
Mm,
economic depressions, coupled with, pretty sure they had a bit of a population boom as well. Like it was just kind of hard
mm.
to like make it by. But Mr. Body is dressed nice, has a car, can afford to just drive around all day, like talking to people. Like he seems to be what we would maybe call upper middle class,
Mhm. You can even see, I mean, we
if not
only see.
upper.
Yeah, and we can even see that, and this is what I love about Kiarostami. He gives you just a crumb of information, and then that's what you have to go by. So we have what the museum worker said to him. There's, the shot. th- What is it, like 30 seconds? We see his shadow from inside his house, but you can see the outside of his home. It has, metal bars. You can kind of see the interiors are nice. He's definitely upper class or upper middle class.
He's got a nice car. You
I
can
think
afford
it's
the
a Range
taxi at
Rover.
the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I did pick up on during this rewatch when we see that snippet of his home is you don't see any other shadows, I don't think. It's just him inside.
Correct.
So perhaps it is family. That's my guess.
And that's honestly, sometimes I do that. That is not something that I even, in watching it and considering it, like, I didn't even go down that route at all. Because it's like, and that's a fascinating question. Like, you could spend a lot of time, and that's how a viewer can come to that film and bring in their own hardships and losses or depressions or what have you. Because who knows? Like, maybe it is, maybe it is. Like, it,
Hmm.
and that's what's incredible about great art.
Absolutely. Perfectly put. But who
Uh,
was the first person? Was it the
the
soldier
young soldier,
or before that it was the construction workers? He doesn't ask anybody. That's right.
which, I mean, I guess we can talk about it now since we've mentioned it.
Mm.
On not watching it, but going back and considering it, and I remember on your show you said that, um, like looking for things to where he's maybe trying to live. If he's looking for somebody to help him kill himself, those guys were pretty desperate looking for work. He could have said, they'd be like, yeah, like I'll take care of you right now. Like,
Hmm.
if he was desperate to die, he could have probably very easily found
Hmm.
a guy, one of those like people in the hundreds of men who are standing out there
Hmm.
trying to find work. And he's, well, because also he said multiple times, like, I can pay well
Yeah.
to find some. So like he's not likely economically hurting.
Yeah. Um,
It's something personal.
Absolutely. I think as well. I mean, Kiarostami once did say um, that the reason why why Mr. Body didn't pick any of the construction workers was he wanted somebody to have a conversation with.
Hmm.
Um, and when I was watching it this time around, what I noticed specifically with those construction workers is the majority of them seemed very young, which leads me to think he probably wants somebody with a bit more life experience to, give him remind him of life's beauty, how the final man does. And I think the only reason why he picks up the young soldier is because he's a soldier. Because if you remember later on, then we discover Mr. Body saying the happiest time of his life was when he was a soldier himself. And perhaps maybe he sees himself in the young man. Perhaps he thinks this young man can, remind him of some beauty in life. But I think that that's the only reason why he would consider a young man, because he skipped all those construction workers who were probably around the same age.
Interesting. I need to go back and check that out. In my mind, there was like a whole swath of people, like old and
Mm.
young. But it is interesting that particular conversation with the young soldier who's on leave for the holidays for boot camp or whatever. I thought about that quite a bit because yeah, if we're looking at things through one of the lenses of him trying to convince himself that, or not even trying to convince himself, him trying to rekindle and remember and just get the joy of life back inside himself. um he's so happy thinking back on his times of service,
Yeah.
and he almost surprises himself going like, yeah, that was one of the best times of my life. Like, we would get up early in the morning before the sun was up. We'd work out. Like, we're best friends. Like, one of the, because again, we look at things in threes a lot of times story wise. I was like, okay, what could these people all different represent? Like, as far like broad strokes for
Mm.
arguments. And for the first soldier, I kind of came up with like community or camaraderie. Like, one
Hmm.
of the arguments for not committing suicide, broadly speaking, could be, hey, like, that would not be good for the other people around you. Or conversely, like, a good reason to stay alive is because, like, it is good to be around other people. And he remembers, oh man, like my time in the service, like the brotherhood I had, the camaraderie I had. You could potentially maybe look at it like nationalistically, but not even like rah rah, like national pride type stuff, but just like the people who I happen to live around, like there is meaning in
Hmm.
the mutuality of our lives and how our lives improve each other, like being around other people brings value to a life, and that's one argument for the value of it.
That's beautiful. See, and again, like you were saying, this is why it's such a great movie to discuss and pick apart with somebody else because I never thought of that. I never made that connection or to even think about them thematically, the three different men. But if I was to do that, you're absolutely right. Community and that sense of belonging for sure.
Well, the reason I thought about it is because the second one, the young seminarian,
Mm,
is I think it's a really interesting thing, and I'm glad he hit that head on because he's making a movie in Iran. Um, in I don't even know if he felt pressure to include that or not, but the second guy is the most obvious and clear. He's basically like, that's a sin and against
mhm,
God, and like that's not irrelevant or anything. But I was like, okay, like that's a very clear argument. Like taking your life is against God. Okay. And he has a really interesting conversation about that. I was like, okay, well, what could the other one? So that's that took some work to get there a little bit. But yeah, I thought that, and that for me, honestly, like the older I get, and as I am, well, I don't even know what the right word is. Not developing, but like as I have my own family, like I put a lot of value on like what kind of community are we in? And
mhm,
I mean, we talked earlier off mic before this, like COVID made community very challenging. And it really made us see like what kind of communities do we want to be a part of? But like, man, we really need community in our lives. That's
mhm.
super important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even just like, I mean, this film community that we're a part of as well, it's become such a regular everyday thing for me almost. I took a week off recently and I felt so lonely, even though I have, I have my husband, I have my cat, I have my friends. Yeah, it's something that's really important to me and you don't notice that until you walk away from it.
And I don't know what all the different listeners' life experience is, but like it can be easy in the moment to be like, man, this sucks. Maybe this isn't really worth it. But then when you think about it, like I think community is maybe the strongest, one of the strongest arguments. But then the second one, we already mentioned it, the seminarian, that little fire guy. And it's interesting also, the first two guys are relatively young, and the second guy, or and the final one looks like he may be even older than Mr. Body.
Yeah,
But
actually you're right. They go up in
the
age.
second one, yeah, the first one is a very young, like almost like pimpled face, like kid, like very young, like just started being a soldier. The second one, a little bit older, but still definitely a young person,
Mm.
uh, who's training for the ministry. I don't remember. Did they say what sect or denomination he was?
No, I just know that he was from Afghanistan, I think. But no, I don't know. I don't know any other details.
But either way, his was the argument for like this is just morally wrong. This
Mm,
is like suicide is a spiritual and moral evil. And I think that, I mean, personally, I don't disagree, but I think that's probably the weakest actual argument for somebody who is experiencing depression or hardship. If you are experiencing hardship to the point of you legitimately planning out and not
mm,
just having the stray thought of, maybe I should end it, but Mr. Body is to the point where like he is
meticulous.
making plans.
Mm.
And if you're there making plans, somebody going, hey, that's wrong. Like, I think that's like far and away the weakest argument.
Absolutely. Well, he doesn't even really bat much of an eyelid when he has to leave him. Like they leave on okay terms. I think he even asks Mr. Body, "Hey, do you want to come up for some eggs?" And Mr. Body says no. But do you remember? Yeah. So
Yeah.
they leave on okay terms. Where the first kid ran away.
He was terrified.
Oh my god. Oh,
Well,
do
and
you know the
also,
backstory about that?
tell me.
The kid? So, I don't know if you know this, but the way Kiarostami shot the car scenes is he would shoot one half, with Mr. Body, and then Kiarostami would be in the seat next to him, and then he would reshoot the same thing with the other actor, and then he'd be in the seat with
Yeah,
Mr.
very
Body.
simple interior stuff. It was almost kind of Ozu-esque, just very like
Yeah.
shot.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
nothing fancy, but here's a shot of a person doing or saying a thing. Like
Yeah,
very like efficient.
yeah, head on. And so Kiarostami also mainly used non-actors in his work. Um, and so with this young soldier, I mean, not a soldier in real life, or I don't think so. But he was either just a starting actor or he's never acted before. And so he gets in this car with Kiarostami and he actually doesn't know what's supposed to play out in the scene. So Kiarostami's asking him, or the kid is asking him, "What do you want me to do?" How he does in the film. And Kiarostami keeps stalling. He doesn't want to tell him. He keeps, like, much how it happens in the movie. So if you watch it with that in your mind, you see this kid actually getting progressively more nervous about what this could possibly be.
He's very uneasy. And
Yeah.
that's almost, and Roger Ebert, he called it out almost too hard. Like there's almost a little bit of weird tension at the beginning
Yeah.
because if you haven't read the synopsis, it's not revealed immediately Mr. Body's intentions.
Oh,
But
you're
like he picks
right.
up this young kid and you're like, is this like
Yeah.
a creepy cruising situation? And this kid is like just getting increasingly uneasy
Yeah.
over the period until he's like, I want you to help me kill myself. And then he like, I guess maybe he's relieved, but he's also freaked out.
So he's getting progressively more nervous as we're seeing, and this is a real emotion that the actor is showing. And at one point, Kiarostami asks him, "Can you reach into the glove compartment and get me a piece of chocolate?" And so the kid reaches in the glove compartment. That part clearly wasn't in the movie. And he opens the glove compartment and he sees a knife. And he just loses it there in terror, in shock, in oh my God. And as soon as the car stops, the kid gets out and runs away. And he runs uphill instead of downhill, genuinely terrified. And so I guess somebody, it's so good. I guess somebody wrangled him from the crew and brought him back somehow and told him what was up. And that's how Kiarostami got the idea to have the kid run away, except he did it downhill versus uphill. And that part was planned. And then he reshot the same thing with Mr. Body, or the actor who plays him. But so there you go. I mean, that maybe brings into question some morals for terrifying a child like that, but that's how that was done.
I've heard and read stories that he heavily uses improv, for lack of a better
Mhm.
word.
Yep.
Like he has this I mean, I guess that is improv, or like a collaborative writing experience, almost kind of like the before trilogy type stuff, where he's like,
Mm.
he brings everybody and be like, here's what we're doing, let's make this real. Like, how would we actually say this? How would we actually do this? Because Kiarostami is not interested in artifice, he's interested in real, genuine human emotion. Like
Mhm.
there were stories I either read or heard about folks talking who worked on the various productions of his, where Kiarostami would like overhear people talking on lunch and break and be like, oh, that's a really good human moment, like we're going to shoot that tomorrow, or like on our next setup we're going to do that.
Wow.
Like he was looking, he is an artist, but his he traffics in the real.
Mm. I mean, he even did that with the actor who plays Mr. Body. He kind of messed with his emotions a bit. There's this story where I think he purposely was speaking to somebody loudly with the actor who plays Mr. Body nearby, saying what a bad actor he is. And did he mess up by hiring a non actor?
Oh
And then that
boy.
in turn forced him to really bring his all to this. And the reason why he uses non actors, so I hear, is because he thinks that they can give him more of that sort of genuine connection to it seeming like real life, you know?
That's a little rugged, but yeah,
It
no,
is.
that's
I agree.
that's I don't know if I'd quite say abusive, but that's maybe not very cool.
On the line, yeah.
But I get it. Yeah, no, I think that brings a lot of realness to it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I do think, interestingly, for a movie that starts with "In the Name of God" and that is so preoccupied with these like transcendent spiritual questions, that the most outwardly and explicitly spiritual figure in this film kind of is the weakest.
The which one?
The
The one,
seminarian, the
yeah,
middle one.
yes, 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 yes,
Because
yes.
he's basically like, that's morally wrong. That's a sin. He's like, yeah, I know, but like, what if I'm miserable and I make everybody else miserable because I'm so miserable? Like that's a sin too. Like, so we're at a sin stalemate, guy. Like,
Yeah.
what are we gonna do? And the and the kid's basically like, oh well, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Come for eggs.
Yeah. You want to keep talking? He's like, no, you can't do anything for me.
I was honestly surprised that his reaction was so calm, I think, because we just had that instance with the soldier who ran away. The first time I watched it, I was expecting him to run away too.
Interesting.
But their exchange was completely, it was very reasonable. They were both willing to hear the other person's argument, and they left. They both smiled at each other and waved.
Well, yeah, and putting myself, if listeners, audience, put themselves in his position, like picking up a kid who's like studying to be like a priest or whatever, like you would be hoping for something deep, something
Hmm.
wise, something like moving and poignant. And basically he goes, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And he goes, man, like that's not really doing it for me. I'll be honest
Oh,
with you.
I just remembered something. You just jogged my memory. Yeah, Mr. Body says something to him. He says, if I was actually looking for advice, I wouldn't have gone to a student.
Oh.
Remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, which maybe again speaks to his age, because later the most insightful man ended up being the oldest too.
Oh, let's
Um,
get to he is those scenes and those conversations. Like that's some of the best stuff I've watched in a while. It's
ever.
so moving. It's so simple,
Mm,
but it's so moving.
mhm. I cried the first time I watched it. The story of the mulberry tree.
Oh.
It
Yeah, I
moved
put that in
me.
my letter. Like, I think that is maybe the most poignant line in the movie.
Mhm. Yeah, and we see those trees again later at the end, which I know we'll get to, but
Super interesting. But yeah, just the simple line of a mulberry saved my life.
yeah.
So in the schema that I was looking at trying to come up with, I was like, okay, the first guy's community, the second guy's like spirituality, morality, and the third guy's beauty.
Mhm.
And I think that is the most compelling. And
Yeah.
I think there's a good argument to make that. Not that the other ones were inefficient, but I think cumulatively ending with the strongest one um, potentially could have pushed Mr. Body over the edge
Oh.
to hope.
Oh, to hope, yeah. I mean, I think so as well. I think it was what's his name? Mr. Bajuri is the final man's name. I believe so. I think he is the one that did save him. And I mean, I'm not spoiling anything. This is just for
It's
listeners
very
who haven't seen it. It's
ambiguous.
very ambiguous. These are
Kiarostami
just
could be like, nope, he died. And you're
yeah,
like, did he
we'll
really?
never know. But I do think it's Mr. Bajuri who saved him. And you can even tell. So he agrees he will help him solely to
Which is interesting because the first two guys were hard nosed.
Mhm. But this man said that he would help him solely because of his child who's sick.
Yes, because Mr. Body's like, hey, I've got the money to pay you.
Exactly. And he says something like, "Oh, I don't agree with what you're doing, but the only reason why I'm doing this is to help my child." And he even says like, I hope you don't go through with this." So they agree to it. Mr. Bajuri goes to work, and then you kind of see Mr. Body in his eyes, or at least I did, this like fleeting look of panic. And then he runs to
Yes.
this man to the museum where he works. I think it's a museum. Um, and he goes solely to remind this man to tell him, when you show up the next day, make sure to throw rocks at me. Then don't throw one, throw two. And the man's like, don't worry, I'll
I'll
throw
throw
three.
three.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very good line.
Yeah. And it just really made that was kind of the moment during this watch where I realized, okay, he doesn't want to do this anymore, because he's at this point just grasping, just grasping for somebody to help him out and convince him otherwise. I really think that is the man that kind of switches things around for Mr. Body.
So I don't know, listeners, if everybody is going to see this. We both, I think it's safe to say, highly recommend it. But if you haven't or you want to hear more, like one of the things, so in addition to, from my perspective, beauty being the most compelling argument, Mr. Bajuri also just personally relates. He's like, yeah, man, I've been there too. So do you want to tell the story briefly of the mulberry tree? And And what led him to that?
Oh gosh, I feel like I'm gonna butcher this now, the order of it. I think he says, okay, let me try my best. Let me try my best. So I don't think we know what happens to him in his life, but Mr. Badgeri says he also wanted to take his own life once.
So like
And
he's lived along, like these other two guys are super young.
mhm.
They still got their whole lives ahead of them. But this other older man was like, yeah, like I've gone through that.
Mhm. And I mean, I don't wanna get too graphic. I mean, I guess I won't, but he grabs a rope, and Mr. Badgeri, and he goes outside, and he's gonna do what he set out to do when he sees a mulberry tree. And he reaches for a mulberry, and he eats it, and he says it was so sweet, it compelled him to eat another and another and another. And I guess it was nighttime when he went out with his rope. And he says that by the time he was done eating the mulberries, the sun had come up, right? And
And did he
what
talk
happened?
about children as well in that?
Was it his child or his wife or somebody came out and they also had a mulberry?
I think so.
Right? A family member of his went and had a mulberry, and so he's having these mulberries with his family, and then I think he says something about watching the sunrise and how beautiful the sunrise is, and essentially, this mulberry tree reminded him of life's simple beauties and pleasures. The taste of a mulberry tree. At one point, he talks about that sunrise, and he even tells Mr. Body, "Don't you want to see this? Don't you want to see the sunrise? Don't you want to taste a mulberry? Don't
And
you
that's the
want to do
titular. He
this?"
goes, "Do you really want to give up the taste of cherries?" And like,
Yes.
I didn't. I'm. Are you a big crier in
Oh my
movies?
God, I cry all the
Yeah.
time.
No, same. I'm very. I never cried watching this movie, but then as soon as I got my notepad out to start to consider, like, that's what I like thinking about these things. I don't know if it had to do with reading subtitles or what. Like, subtitle movies make me cry plenty, but I didn't cry watching this, but I definitely was crying considering, especially that speech. And just the
Mhm.
question of the line, "A mulberry saved my life," is
Mhm.
beautiful. But
Mhm.
that pointed question of, do you want to give up the taste of cherries? Like, whew.
Yeah. I mean, that's enough to yeah, I mean, it was beautiful. It
How much
really was.
stronger is that than the seminarian going, suicide's bad. Like, to see those together, it's literally laughable.
Yeah, yeah. It's beautiful, and, it gets even better whenever you watch it again, I really do think so. Interestingly, complete total aside, you should pair Taste of Cherry with The Wind Will Carry Us, because it's a similar premise
Is
in
that
a
another
car.
Kiarostami?
Yep. I don't think it's on Criterion, it's probably on Canopy, but it's, similar to Taste of Cherry. The setup of being in the car, like many of his movies, is also there, but it's a lot more lighthearted, than Taste of Cherry. It's kinda nice sort of palate cleanser after Taste of Cherry. But the reason why I mention
99.
it
That was 2 years later.
yeah, the reason why I mention it is because it's littered with little moments like, what we hear in Taste of Cherry about the mulberry trees, about the cherry tree. It's that. It's just filled with little moments like that, and it's so worth it. I actually like it more than Taste of Cherry, so
It
if your
sounds a little
favorite
bit more hopeful.
yeah, if your
To
favorite part
keep
of
vigil for a dying relative. Okay,
Mhm.
interesting.
If your favorite part of Taste of Cherry was that final, conversation, then The Wind Will Carry Us is basically that.
Well, it doesn't look like it's streaming in the US, and I don't think it's on a disc anywhere. Criterion or Kino or somebody put that one out for us.
That one you can find on the Internet Archive.
Archive? Beautiful.
Yep.
I'm a regular of. I'm so grateful for the Internet Archive.
When they were down last month, oh my goodness, I was not happy about that.
um, so I guess we should talk about the ending then.
Oh, my
So that
favorite
he
part.
has the agreement
Yep.
with the final man with a great mustache,
Mhm.
by the way.
Oh, the best?
um, so he goes back to his home to
Mhm.
prepare. I mean, ostensibly, because I mean, he's not in there for long, and you don't want to put a lot of like. I'm not sure what he's doing there. He doesn't look to like change clothes, or he goes home for something. Maybe
Yep.
so that we can see his home. I don't know what, or to have a little bit of a break to kind of because it's silent. It is an exterior shot.
Mm.
And like you said, there's bars and there's curtains. You see his silhouette doing things, but maybe that's just kind of a respite for the audience in real time to kind of consider everything that has come before and to kind of anticipate what's going to happen. Because, like you said, he's made up his mind
Mm.
that he wants to end things, but then so many things he seems to be trying to convince himself or clinging to life, or the, hey, like, make sure you like make sure that don't be burying me if I'm actually just asleep, because they don't say it explicitly, but I mean, Ebert mentioned it in his review. He's like, he's going to take pills. Like, I don't think he ever
He
mentions
does.
pills. He
I
does.
think
Okay.
to the to somebody near the
Maybe it
start, I
was
think he
brief.
mentions. Yeah, it's so super brief. Yeah.
Um, he's like, if I'm actually just sleeping, like, make sure that I'm alive,
Yeah.
basically. Cause yeah, you don't, ugh, waking up buried alive. That sounds like a nightmare. She's like, yeah, make sure that I'm dead before you do that. So it seems like he's maybe clinging to life. So that period of time where he goes back home to
Mm,
kind of reset before he takes the taxi out to the hole that he's dug. He gets in the hole. You have a really beautiful shot that's distinct from anything else we've seen. The
mm,
shot of his head and like his like upper body in the hole at night cuts to a beautiful shot of a cloudy night, the moon. There's a storm perhaps,
mhm.
and then it get meta. Like what? How do you read that? Like I don't know if I have a read on that. There are thematic things that are interesting to me, but I'm not quite sure how I read the ending yet.
Um, it's taken me a while to get here, but
I'm generally I generally read it as hopeful,
yeah.
but we've talked earlier about how Kiarostami sometimes can get pretty meta.
Mhm.
Uh there's quite a shift at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it won't work for a lot of people, but as we were saying earlier, I really do think that it's your own emotional reaction as a viewer, or a lack thereof, if you don't have one with that ending, that will lead you to these very different interpretations. And I'm sure for you, as it was for me, by the time you get to that ending, I was just overflowing with emotions, especially after that final segment with Mr. Bajari. And so then we see this final moment, and then of Mr. Body in the grave, I guess you could call it, and the camera cuts to black. We're left with nothing. We're left with darkness, actually, for a period where you just hear the thunder. And
It's a
then,
minute. It's he lets you sit in that for a little while.
oh yeah,
Like in a
oh yeah,
theater especially, I bet that would be I wonder what that would be like.
especially when it premiered at the
Yeah.
at Con. Yeah, I would have thought that maybe the screen went out, but it's an interesting moment. I actually like that it lingers because, to me, I think that forces us to sit in that isolation with Mr. Body. And only through that isolation where you see nothing else can you truly think about the beauties in life that you've experienced and that you've absorbed thus far. And so Kiarostami leaves us in that darkness, and then all of a sudden we get that handy cam footage, right? And it's the making of Taste of Cherry. You see Kiarostami, you see Mr. Body. And then what's interesting and what I picked up on is you see moments from earlier in the film, little symbols of Mr. Body's mind thinking of more hopeful things. We see the soldiers running, which
Mhm.
immediately makes you think of when he says earlier, the happiest time of my life was
Yep,
as a soldier. We see
definitely.
we see glimpses of the mulberry trees again, probably harking back to his conversation he just had with Mr. Badgery. And so we're seeing these little snippets. And to me, I think Kiarostami showing all of this that was touched upon earlier are these reminders for the audience and for Mr. Body of the beauty found in the mundane and your memories. And I think that that's a hint that Kiarostami gives us that Mr. Body as well realized the preciousness of life, and they're hints to his thoughts and what ultimately saved him, I think.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on those positive things, and I don't know if I'm because yeah, it's so interesting. This is such a simple story, but because of the way in which it is told, especially in the finale, it almost gives it this like big, grand, mythic quality. Because then it's like, obviously it's a movie, but then with the real footage at the end, you're like, wait, like, is Mr. Body even real? Like, I should value my life. Like, it's almost kind of like he takes the focus completely off the resolution of, which again gives something staying power. Just like
Mhm.
you brought up David Lynch, if you don't give somebody every step of the way, it gives it that much more value because you can engage with it, and like there is no ending to it.
Mhm.
um
It could also mean, this just popped into my mind, but it could be commentary, maybe, of Kiarostami saying that art saves lives, that cinema saves lives, right?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I mean, it could be that simple, is what I'm saying. I just gave that long-winded answer, but it could be as simple as this.
Sure. Well, yeah, because there's so much joy. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if they're real soldiers or actors, because like there weren't a whole lot of soldiers in the movie from what I can recall. So
Mm-mm.
those are probably just real soldiers. And like you said, he talked about the, oh, we didn't talk about this even yet. I was struck, man, when Criterion does something right, they do it real right. I love the Blu-ray menu, and I tweeted and whatever social media um when I was watching it earlier this week. The Blu-ray menu is of the scene where it's a beautiful, like wide, far away shot of when Mr. Body's car going around a curve falls off track, and
Yes.
going to the first argument. If we're looking at the three big arguments of Community, without missing a beat, all these people, all these laborers there rush to help him. His car isn't like, it's like half fallen off. It's like
Mhm.
on the edge of this dirt road, and dozens of people who probably don't know this man personally rush to his aid to help get him back on track. That's also a very powerful scene that at the beginning of the ending of the experience watching it on Blu-ray, like that's the image you're left with too. Potentially like a reminder to us to be like, we need to be looking out for each other, because who
Yeah.
knows who's going through what Mr. Body's going through. Like,
Yeah.
once
I'm
you get to a
so
certain age, we've all probably had those thoughts and been there somewhat. Like, be on the lookout for other people to rally around.
I'm so happy you mentioned that. I actually included that moment in my notes, and yeah, we completely forgot to bring it up, but it's my favorite sort of sense of community that Kiarostami gives us in the film, and that's exactly what it is, what you just said, and just these pockets of poetic warmth that he gives us. And there's such a simplicity to that scene. It's what, like a minute long, and the camera goes close to the people that are helping him, and you see all their faces and they're all smiling as they're doing this and helping them. I think they're even counting in English, trying to move the car back like in unison. Yeah, it was very, very beautiful moment. I'm glad to hear that that's on the Blu-ray, because I have this old copy, as you know, which is different.
I wonder what that one's like.
You know what? This is
Have you
super
had that for a long
embarrassing.
time, or did you just find that at a secondhand shop?
I have
I
had
haven't
this
seen that DVD in forever.
I have had this for a very, very long time. Have I actually watched it,
Was it one of
opened it
those
up?
blind
No.
buys that just sat on your shelf? I mean, I
No.
showed you before we recorded. Who knows how many years ago I purchased Close Up, and it's still in the wrapper.
Yeah.
I will
I
be
I at
breaking
least open it
into
up
that
from the
soon.
wrapping, so
I often do. I'm not one of those collectors that's like, I won't open it until I watch it. Like,
Mm,
especially with the boutique releases, I love
yeah.
looking at all the things.
For me, it's the essays that they always release inside that are my favorite, personally.
Yeah, Criterion does do very good
Mhm.
with that. Just personal soapbox, be very quick. Every DVD or Blu-ray should have at least one commentary. What are we doing?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I had
Hire
to
us to do it. We'll do it for
Yeah,
real cheap.
absolutely. I would even do it
I mean,
for
I don't know if
free.
it'd be worth yeah, send me a couple of Blu-rays.
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
Any other final thoughts, Marta, on this one?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I could go on and talk about this movie for hours, but
This really is a movie that,
yeah.
like, I feel like if you taught this in a film school curriculum, you could you could get so much out of this.
Mhm.
It's like a 95-minute movie with not a whole lot traditionally what we would think of on screen.
Mhm.
He's such an understated artist. Yeah, I can't wait to watch Kiarostami's films for the rest of my life.
I'm glad. I'm glad that you're coming into the fold. You're gonna be a part of this Kiarostami movement or resurgence, let's call it. Yeah, I guess all that I would say is if you have 90 minutes to spare, watch Taste of Cherry, watch any other of his films. They're usually just as long, if not shorter. And if you see a character in a car, you know you're going to be in for a treat.
What would you say might be a good entry point? 'Cause hopefully, this conversation will. I don't imagine maybe most of our listeners have heard of this or seen it. It I wouldn't say it's the most challenging movie, but if you don't watch movies like this, it can kind of be hard. Would you say
Mhm.
that this would be a good first one, or
It
Where's
would
the
be
Friend's
okay.
House, or what do you
I
think might be a good dipping your toe in?
I would do, I mean, if you want me to give you like a really good answer, I would say do what I did. So start with the Coker trilogy, which is Where is the Friend's House, followed by Through the Olive Trees, and then And Life Goes On. So that's the three. Then I would do Taste of Cherry, because as we said, Kiarostami would have grouped them together had he had the choice. From there, do something like The Wind Will Carry Us. And after that, then I would watch Close Up.
Okay. I can't wait to watch Close Up.
It's
But
it's
yeah, so
one that
listeners, you've got it. Check out, wait for a 50% off Criterion sale, or go to your local library, or if you have the Criterion channel. So much of his work is on the
oh
channel
yeah,
right now, which is fantastic. But Coker trilogy, maybe that'll be an episode down the road.
think you'll love it.
All right, Marta. So we really only have one segment here, but before we get to the shout out segment, there is one question wanted to ask you. We're not to be derogatory, but word on the street is that Vancouver audiences can sometimes be lackluster. Vancouver cinema going audiences can be kind of whack. So, do you have a particularly fun or funny or aggravating memory of seeing a movie with a particularly bad Vancouver crowd?
Do I ever? I'm so happy you asked me this because it's fresh in my mind. It was for coincidentally the movie that's called The Substance. Um,
Also, very rude of them not to reach out to me to do a collab. I see you've got your little box back there. Nobody sent me anything.
oh yeah, this up with the little got the little this thing.
Very
In
cute.
yep. um, but yeah, it was a screening of The Substance, so it was recent. That's probably why it's fresh in my mind. And I mean, this is a conversation I have with so many of my friends in Vancouver and on a global level, and that's that if you're going to go watch something that's newer or a blockbuster or a part of, mainstream media, audiences just aren't what they were. They'll be on their phones, they'll, take pictures, they'll have that brightness on, they'll talk. I mean, I don't need to tell you, I'm sure it's, we all know.
I
Um,
am blessed to have a couple of very incredible repertory cinemas, and
well,
that's where I mostly go. I don't do a whole lot of like
mhm,
AMC's or Cinemarks or the big chains. And when I do, there's a lot of nonsense.
mhm.
But yeah, it's from the people who I know who regularly attend AMC's and things like that, I hear
It's
horror
awful.
stories.
I'm just like you. I only go to my boutique cinemas to watch, the older stuff or the international stuff where audiences are completely different. But something like The Substance, that was a screening at one of the bigger, like the Canadian version of an AMC, essentially. And the movie starts. We're about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes in, packed crowd. I'm sitting in the middle row. I have a nice seat and it's quiet all of a sudden in the movie. I think yeah, 10 minutes into the film. Somebody a few rows behind me drops something. It's not a phone, but it's it's metal and it rolls. So it it rolls down the theater through the rows
Those
and
big
this
heavy water bottles or something?
maybe again just metal and it rolls. That's all I know. And I kid you not, This person gets up, puts the flashlight on their phone.
No.
It gets better. Goes to my row, because I guess it rolled through my row, gets on their hands and knees with the flash on and starts crawling through the row to find their whatever. I did not get up when they got to my point because I'm watching a film. I think this is very rude. But it was remarkable to me that, it wasn't a wallet, it wasn't a phone. These things don't roll. So if it was a water bottle, why couldn't that wait until after the movie's over?
Yikes.
Yeah.
That's rough.
Yeah. It's hysterical in hindsight. I mean, it's remarkable, but I think it only added to the experience of watching a movie like The Substance, which is already just bananas.
I still haven't gotten to see it yet, but it looks nuts. I've read so many people, like a lot of modern cinema where I kind of know what I'm getting going into it. I've had so much fun reading and watching people's reactions to that one. I really appreciated your write up for it.
Thank you.
It's very interesting to see um, women who have been around the movies for a while, in particular, react to that one. I've really
Mm.
enjoyed the work that has come from that, the response.
It's interesting reading from women who are, maybe a bit older than your average letterboxed user because
Yeah.
I think their reactions, mine included, were a bit different um, to what younger women were saying. Um, Yeah, it was a good film. It kinda lost me near the end, but I enjoyed it. If you can't stomach body horror, I would say probably don't watch it. But if you can,
Yeah, I don't know how much it sound. I know it gets nuts at the end.
they're
Uh,
nominated for, an Oscar now for makeup
Good.
and FX, and I do hope
More
they win.
genre movies should get nominated. It's also kind of a double-edged sword. I don't want to get too far off track here. I love Everything Everywhere All at Once, but I feel like after it had the successful Oscar campaign, I haven't heard one person talk about it since.
I mean, I loved that movie when it came out. I've completely forgotten about it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I was like, this is so good. I liked Swiss Army Man, but Everything Everywhere All at Once was so good.
Mhm.
Ke Kwan is back. The Daniels, I'm going to be a lifelong fan. And then they won it all, and then really haven't thought about it since.
Same.
All right, time for our segment then. So substance shoutouts. We've talked a lot. We've given if somebody is listening actively, I know our listeners, if they have their notes apps or their letterbox opens, they've probably got plenty of things on the watch list. But substance shoutouts, it doesn't just have to be films, but feel free to give us some films. But what have you been watching, reading,
Ooh.
listening to, engaging with that has been edifying, enjoyable, challenging? What have you been taking in that you've really loved and want to commend to others?
Oh gosh, let me think. In terms of books, embarrassingly enough, I haven't read anything that hasn't been a filmmaker biography in a while. I guess for the sake of this conversation, I can grab that Kiarostami book that I do recommend. Oops, there goes everything. That Kiarostami book that I mentioned to you, which I think is great supplemental reading with this episode, and that's Cinematic Lessons from Abbas Kiarostami by, I'm going to butcher this, Mahmoud Reza Sani. You can find that on Amazon. And it was essentially Kiarostami's masterclass that he did while he was still alive. And it's fantastic. It's a quick read, but it's filled with so much insight. That story that I gave you about Kiarostami in the car with the soldier, that was from that book. So I would say that for a book. In terms of what I've been listening to, whenever I go into a work heavy mode, I seem to listen to um, Sakamoto and his work quite often. Um, Ruichi Sakamoto. So always a fan of his work. If I think listeners, yeah, let me put listeners onto actually a great music platform called NTS Radio. Have you heard of that?
I have not. Music is always, when I had my two other co-hosts, one of them Vincent, he would always be the one to like share music. Like I only just so I only just got an actual streaming service deal. Like I listened to music on YouTube basically
No.
for the longest time, but I'm starting to
Then
try to actively purchase. So NTS
NTS Radio will
radio
be perfect for you then. It's a free app, or I mean, I listen to it on my in my browser
browser.
while I'm
Nice.
working.
That's how I do it a lot too. My wife always
Exactly.
makes fun of me because I was like, I don't usually download the apps. Like I grew up very poor, so I'm like averse to paying for things. And like I like music, but I listen to so many podcasts. I'm like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna pay $8 a month for and like
Yeah.
hardly ever listen to it?
So with NTS, it's kind of like Letterboxd where you can use it for free with no restrictions, but the premium gets you, perks or whatever. I just use the free one. And NTS radio is essentially a radio, but it's categorized by what they call infinite mixtapes. So for each different genre that they have, and they have so many genres, I can't even list them all. They'll have mixtapes 24/7 by the world's best
Interesting.
DJs and artists, and it could be anything. It could be jazz, it could be classical, it could be hip hop, it could be metal. They have a metal mixtape. They have a film score one, which I turn to quite often, and they'll do
Hmm,
segments on scores. The one I've recently been listening to has been their video game mixtape, and specifically all the music from Final Fantasy. Not
interesting.
sure why I chose that, but it's actually quite good. So yeah, NTS Radio is a fantastic resource, especially if you want to learn about new artists and new songs that you may not know about. I always have Shazam on my phone and I whip it out all the time to if I catch a song that I like. So yeah, NTS Radio, I would say. And then as for movies, uh oh, the my favorite movie that I've seen in the last few months, which is high praise, it's called Haru from 1996. It is a pretty much forgotten Japanese movie, but you can find it as of right now on YouTube in super high quality to watch. I actually just emailed a distributor about it. I won't say who to see if they're willing to maybe release it in the West. But it's a wonderful film made during the internet's infancy, so 96, about two film lovers who meet on a forum. They don't know anything about each other. They don't even know that, one's a guy and the other's a girl. But they just bond over this shared connection of film and they email back and forth. And the majority of the movie is just you watching their text conversations on screen, which may not sound that interesting, but it's very beautiful and captures this sort of nostalgia for what was the internet once, but also this sort of universal language of how films bring us together. It's really, really stunning and honestly kind of more relevant than ever watching it now.
Interesting. So
Mhm.
it's always kind of funny when there's ones that so few people have seen. It only has like 12,000 logs on Letterbox, but only and I follow a lot of people. I probably need to cull my list a little bit, but I follow plenty of people and only you and one other person that I follow has seen it. But between the two of you, it's got a perfect 5-star average.
There you go.
Well, I will add that to the watch list. And I love a high quality YouTube or internet archive
It's all
film
you
for
can
some of those
find. I
hard to
ordered
find
a
ones.
physical copy off of eBay that came from China, but
Haru?
it has subs. Um,
That
like
sounds
20
maybe that
bucks.
that could be a potential Radiance title. They're pretty good with stuff like
Maybe
that.
that's somebody that I reached out to. I can't
Fran
say.
is pretty good about that, and I wonder what the rights are for that. I need to get Fran on here sometime.
Hmm.
Well, Marta, thank you. Those are I'm Haru sounds great. I had never heard of that. I'm really looking forward to watching that
Let me
sometime.
know what you think.
I absolutely will. So Marta, you are on hiatus. I don't know exactly when this is getting published, but you're as of this recording in between projects.
Hmm.
Where can people follow you, see what you're doing? Where can people kind of find the work that you're doing in film criticism and
Yes.
like, what are we? Are we film critics? Are we like film advocates? Or
I prefer to call, I don't know. I always find myself something in between a critic and it sounds pretentious, but almost like a historian of sorts, because I really
yeah,
do appreciate looking at films from a historical and cultural angle. And that's kind of my main thing. It's kind of the angle I want to go to. Um, but anyway, now that I'm in between projects, I'm trying to think. I mean, you can find all my writing, my published articles on my website. So that's martadjo.com. Um, I have the first season of my podcast, McFly's Movie House, which you can also find on my website and on Spotify and Apple. If you want to read really, really long letterboxed reviews, my handle is Marta McFly. And then I'm also Marta.McFly on Instagram. And I think that should be all. By mid January, I'll launch my new publication. So I can update with all that information once that's ready to rock and roll.
is there going to be a season 2 of McFly's Movie House coming?
Uh, I don't think so. We are on a hiatus. I will be pursuing this publication quite aggressively come January. And then within that, there will be a podcast element, but on a more casual
Excellent.
basis
Okay.
versus once a week.
I'm very familiar with how that goes. We're a bi-weekly show with occasional drops on the week off.
Mhm.
Like two to three a month is quite a bit of work. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. All right, well, I will put those in the show notes, and I'm looking forward to seeing whatever kicks back off in the new iteration.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. This was a treat and a pleasure to talk about one of my all time favorite movies.
You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you very much.
So there you have it, my conversation with Marta Djordjevic on Taste of Cherry. It's actually kind of funny as I was getting the links together here to put in the show notes. I actually saw on her website on the About page, kind of gives her bio and all the stuff she's working on. She actually has a Kiarostami quote from Taste of Cherry. So thought that was pretty great. Really wonderful to have her on the show. And for this, I'm sure she'll be back in the future. And we've talked about me maybe joining her on some of her future episodes that she's doing. Her new venture, primarily writing with some podcasting, is called Rewind and Revive. We'll have the links for Instagram and her Substack newsletter in the show notes there. So check her out, give her a follow. If you are a heavy letterbox user and enjoy building your watch list, a lot of her posts often have helped me find really enjoyable things that I have really liked, or things that I am very much looking forward to checking out in the future. So check those out, give her a follow, and maybe tell her that we sent you. If you love and enjoy what we do here at The Substance, consider joining us. We have our own Patreon link in the show notes. And if monthly support, we're still working on getting all of our ducks in a row as far as what the Patreon benefits are. But if you just want to throw us a little tip and say, hey, appreciated what you did, want to throw us a couple of bucks, you can do that on Cash App at $the Substance Pod. As we're entering the new year, getting things going, that every dollar helps, and we appreciate everybody who takes a minute to do that. If you have any suggestions for future guests or topics or films or any other type of Substance episodes you'd like to hear, you can reach us at thesubstancepod@gmail.com. We always love hearing from our listeners. And if you want to send us a voice memo, if you watched the movie and loved it, or watched the movie and hated it, had a strong reaction either way, would love to hear, send us a voice memo, email it to thesubstancepod@gmail.com, and we will play that on a future show. Okay, announcement time next week on The Substance. We are back with another substantive cinema. This is going to be a fun double feature with this one, as Marta is Canadian, and the next movie we will be covering is a big Canadian movie from a couple years ago. I like movies, and I had the just real pleasure to be joined by the female lead of the film, Romina Dugo, and we had a wonderful time. So loved Romina in the movie. Since then, I've looked at some of her work in some of her shorts, look at some of the stuff she has coming up. Very excited about it. It was a wonderful conversation. I look forward to sharing that with you. And I believe that I Like Movies is now currently streaming on Canopy and Hoopla. So check out I Like Movies and get ready for that conversation in your feed next week. Thanks for joining me here. I've been your host, Philip Marinello, and we will see you next time on The Substance. I also heard one story talking about the Vancouver audiences. I heard you guys had quite a Stop Making Sense showing where
Did
everybody
you
was
hear about this
just.
through me?
I heard that I didn't. You go to a Stop Making Sense
Yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
like
I'm
everybody
just
was like
yeah.
dead.
It was horrible. I got up with my friend to go dance in the back, and one of the attendants came up to us and he's like, "You can't do that." And we were we were like, "We are in the back. There is nobody behind us." He's like, "We'll just move away from the door so people
That's
can
like the
escape
whole
if
point.
they."
Like they were selling out shows based on like this is like a concert dance party type
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah, 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 yeah.